speakers. First, Leslie Owens. Leslie is Senior Analyst at Forrester Research. She's a leading expert on enterprise search, semantic tools, information classification, and taxonomies. Leslie helps enterprises improve access to information through strategic application of technology and guidance on process. Next, we have Nicki Lodico. Nicki Lodico is a Ford Foundation Manager of Information Management, where she is responsible for ensuring the collection, organization, preservation of, and access to Foundation records, resources, and intellectual assets. And last but not least, Toby Conrad. Toby Conrad has been Senior Consultant with SmartLogic for many years and has advised organizations such as NASA, Bank of America, Royal Bank of Scotland, BNP Paribas, Oxy, Autodesk, and others on enterprise semantics for search and content management. Let me go through some housekeeping really quickly. Our webinar today will extend for approximately 45 minutes, with about 10 minutes at the end for questions. You can participate in this webinar in two ways. Of course, listen to our speakers and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to get your questions into the Q&A box in the lower corner of the dialog box anytime during the webinar. We will also make a recording of this webinar available approximately 48 hours from now. As always, I'd like to start off the webinar with a quick introduction to SmartLogic, who we are and what we do, although I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. SmartLogic is a software company that specializes in semantics. SmartLogic Semaphore is an enterprise semantic platform that augments traditional information management systems like search, content management, and business workflow engines by adding advanced content classification, metadata, and navigation capabilities to deliver a more complete enterprise information management experience. More than 250 customers like NASA, Bank of America, Ford Foundation, of course, Autodesk, Oxy, National Health Service, RBS, and many others use SmartLogic today. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. I would now like to turn the webinar over to Leslie, who will open the discussion with the lay of the land in the adoption/migration to SharePoint and present the challenges that organizations may face in this process. Welcome, Leslie.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to be speaking today about the need for semantic capabilities in information management, especially in managing a SharePoint environment. So I'll finish by offering my contact information. I'm available for questions anytime, as well as Q&A at the end of today's webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Leslie. That was a very comprehensive presentation on the challenges of SharePoint and the recommendations in mitigating these challenges. Now, Toby Conrad is going to talk about how semantics can support SharePoint objectives such as improved sharing, workflow, records management, compliance, and of course, findability. Toby?
Thank you, Maya, for the introduction, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody on the call. So Leslie has really done a great job of describing the reasons for using semantics as part of a SharePoint implementation or adoption. So I'm going to go on and to describe how semantics can be used to build an ontology much more quickly, to classify your content easily, and really to maximize the benefits of your SharePoint investment. As Leslie described, the SharePoint 2010 platform includes a managed metadata service and term store. And the term store in particular provides basic functionality for containing a hierarchy of taxonomies or a simple hierarchy of topics or a simple taxonomy. But essentially, without more powerful tools to use in conjunction, you're likely to spend a long time building and managing your taxonomy, and really it may not be optimized for the content and for the use cases on your user community. So what you really need is a platform that can integrate with the SharePoint term store and manage metadata service to help you maximize performance and usability. Now, as Leslie described, often clients are looking for ways to reuse and repurpose existing taxonomies. And although that's not necessarily the best place to start, it can certainly help you to flesh out the right taxonomy for you much, much more quickly. So having a tool set which allows you to easily import existing assets, be they taxonomies, thesauri, controlled vocabularies, directories, lists, navigational structures, and so on. Being able to import those in very easily, being able to look at the parts of those models which may be really valuable to you, and being able to quickly select those and bring them into your model can be an enormous time saver and help to ensure the completeness and granularity of your model. So having imported those things in and being able to combine them together, of course you need to be able to restructure them simply and visually according to the needs of your business. You can then use other tools such as text mining and entity extraction and co-occurrence analysis. So essentially with these tools you take a sample of your content, you feed them into the machine, and the machine determines important topics, vocabulary, and even relationships which can inform your ontology and therefore again save you a lot of time and ensure completeness. It's also very valuable to be able to collaborate with subject matter experts, both as a way of getting input into the knowledge model, but also as a way of validating the accuracy and organization of the taxonomy. You'll also need a platform by which you can easily test the performance of the taxonomy, identify any weaknesses, and be able to make improvements so that you've really optimized everything for your environment. The other thing that's very useful to do is to analyze search logs and user behavior, and also to complete the loop by catching user feedback at point of use. All these things can really help you focus on the most important areas, and you know, we often say to clients one of the hardest things in building a taxonomy is knowing when to stop. So again, really getting the priorities is key to success. So all of those tools and techniques really allow you to build a high-performance taxonomy or ontology in much less time and get you delivering value early. Now that leads on to the question of the content itself. Now you've got this great way of organizing your content, how are you going to actually classify your content? And SharePoint 2010 provides an environment in which you can get users to manually tag up content. There are a number of issues with manual classification. Firstly, people tend to be busy doing their day job, and so may submit content to SharePoint and not spend the time to classify it. Or if they do, the problem is that they may not do so consistently. People all see the world in a different way. They may be familiar with different parts of the taxonomy and not be aware of other topics by which they should be classifying. And so the end result tends always to be inconsistently classified content, and therefore everything downstream will suffer as a result. But there are also questions such as if you're migrating content into SharePoint, or you've already got content in SharePoint, how are you going to get users to manually classify all of that existing content, and it's probably quite unrealistic. The other problem, of course, is if you change the taxonomy over time, there's the need to reclassify all of the content, because you don't know which documents may refer to those new topics which you've added, or indeed topics which you've removed or changed. So manual classification has a lot of drawbacks. So the alternative is to use semantic technology for automatically classifying your content. So what happens here is the semantics use information contained within your taxonomy or ontology. In other words, what are the topics, what hierarchy do they fit in, what important vocabulary is associated with that topic, and what other relationships exist between topics. And that's all really valuable knowledge which can be used to automatically classify content based on what that content is really about, not just simply that a word or a term is in a document, but what the real meaning of the document is. So that can be used to generate metadata describing that content automatically. So from an end user's perspective, when they're in SharePoint, they simply submit content in the usual way. They may be uploading a document or simply entering a discussion thread or a wiki or a page, and that content is automatically classified and the metadata stored in the library. Now, should users decide that they want to add or remove tags, they can do so, therefore further ensuring the quality and completeness of the classification. Now, there are many types of metadata that can be generated automatically, and we're probably all familiar with the metadata we see on the right-hand side of this diagram. Who created the document, when was it created, and what format is it in. But we can also create metadata which drives the process or life cycle of the content. What is the content for? Who is allowed to see it? How must it be protected? And when should it be disposed of? And lastly, and perhaps equally importantly, we can generate informational metadata, which describes what the content is about and is essentially there to improve the findability and reuse of the content. So where does classification and metadata fit vis-a-vis search? Well, search is used when users are trying to find content. But the difference with auto-classification is that you can generate metadata as soon as the content is created or born. So that means that the metadata lives with the content throughout its life cycle and can be used to help with the management and the sharing and the repurposing of content and ultimately how it's archived. However, that metadata also, as Leslie described, feeds into the search process. Because the classification was generated using all of the knowledge contained within your taxonomy or ontology and really describes the aboutness of the content, that metadata can be fed into the search engine process so that the search engine can do a much better job of delivering the most relevant content at the top of the result set. The auto-classification process within SharePoint can also be used to put content automatically into the right libraries and also to apply the right content types. Again, this allows users to more easily navigate to the most relevant content. But also, given that we've applied a content type in the library, we can start to automatically apply policies to the content. Policies which may inform the records management process and determine how long content should be kept before disposition, used during legal e-discovery to support any litigation defense, or used in a data loss prevention scenario. In other words, does this content contain important information about intellectual property? Does it contain confidential information? Things which relate to personal identification or personal health information and so on. So then policies can be applied to ensure that only the right people see that content, and essentially you don't end up being the next WikiLeaks or losing valuable intellectual property. Other applications for metadata include a better organization of the content, the ability to automatically route and distribute content to the right people and to alert people when things have happened, but also increasingly for analytics. So all of us probably are familiar with analytics over structured data, which really tells us what's going on in the business. But you can also use analytics over unstructured information in order to really tell us why those things are happening and to provide great insight. And of course, good quality metadata improves findability. the semantic classification process can also be used as content is migrated into SharePoint. So if you're bringing new content in, it can be automatically classified. Consistent metadata can be stored against the content. And again, you can put the content into the right library and apply the right content type. So again, all of this really ensures consistency over all of your different content and therefore allows you to leverage that content much more. The quality of metadata also improves findability. I think Nicki will provide some further examples of this. But as well as improving the quality of results and most importantly, the quality of results at the top of the hit list, you can also use that metadata to provide faceted search, to zoom in on the most important results, to zoom out for more context and get a better context for the query that you have, but also to pan around to important related topics, which really fill in the picture and help to solve problems. And not only can you link to important content, but applications that allow people to complete a task, or people that provide expertise around a particular subject area. We can also use the model to support visualization of subject areas and domains, and this is increasingly popular and important now, and really facilitates and makes more efficient the learning process within or beyond an organization. So in reaching a conclusion, using semantics within a SharePoint environment, or indeed anywhere within the enterprise, really helps you to accurately catalog all of the content that you have. The high-quality metadata that's generated allows SharePoint to do a better job of managing and locating content so that users are able to find, share, and collaborate more easily. Users can reuse and repurpose content more often rather than recreating it each time in the cycle that Leslie described. And essentially all of this will save time and money and reduce risk associated with keeping all of that content. So what if you want to implement semantics or semaphore with SharePoint? Well, Early and Associates are one of our most experienced partners in North America. They have a very strong and flexible methodology that really ensures that the right strategy is put in place, and building on that foundation, that these solutions deliver maximum business value in the shortest period of time. They have the skills in ontology building, content classification, software implementation, and also important user interface design in order to ensure successful projects and to help put the right governance in place so that you can maintain them properly over time. We've worked together with Early and Associates on lots of client projects and engagements now, and I have to say that in all those cases, clients have really been delighted with the quality of service and the value that they have received. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you've found it of interest and value, and so with that, I'll pass back to Maya.
Thanks, Toby, for that overview of how semantics can support SharePoint objectives, especially with things such as improved sharing, workflow, records management, compliance, and findability. And also, I appreciate that you took the time to focus on taxonomy building and functionality, because we are getting questions based around that, which we'll focus on in the Q&A session. Now, I'd actually like us to turn our attention to Nicki Lodico from the Ford Foundation. Nicki is going to share with us about how Ford Foundation is integrating semantics with SharePoint through taxonomy and ontology to enhance metadata quality, improve findability, and enhance end-user experience. Nicki?
Thank you, Maya, and thank you, Leslie and Toby. I think your presentations will lead very nicely into this discussion on how we've actually implemented some of what you've been talking about. So in this portion of today's presentation, I'll start with a brief introduction to the Ford Foundation, followed by a statement of the problems we identified in managing information across the Foundation, our approach for preparing to address those problems, the strategy we implemented, a brief demonstration of the results of the work completed so far and some lessons we've learned in the process, and if time allows, a summary of our planned next steps. So the Ford Foundation is an independent, nonprofit, non-governmental institution established in 1936. Since that time, we've distributed nearly $16 billion in grants worldwide. We operate in the United States and in 10 regions around the world. Our commitment to social justice is carried out through programs that strengthen democratic values, reduce poverty and injustice, promote international cooperation, and advance human achievement. The Foundation works in the three main program areas shown here on this slide. For details on our areas of focus and other information about our work, please visit the Foundation's website at fordfoundation.org. So in late 2007, the Foundation decided to take stock of its ability to manage information across growing SharePoint and other repositories. The main problem we faced in a nutshell was that users were increasingly frustrated by content sprawl and poor findability. They no longer knew where to store or browse for content in our SharePoint environment and had insufficient tools to search for the content. So users began creating additional non-SharePoint, non-enterprise repositories in which to store and find the content they created. And this, of course, contributed to the content sprawl, which in turn made it increasingly difficult for the Foundation IT and information management workers to provide effective support. Here's a more detailed look at the challenges we faced. The Foundation provided little guidance on or requirements for information governance. We used different terminologies across divisions and applications. There existed multiple repositories, each with its own information architecture, and we had really loose procedures for provisioning and deprovisioning sites and libraries within SharePoint, which over time resulted in pockets of abandoned content. We had inadequate tools and procedures for contributing content to authoritative repositories, for managing and collaborating on documents, and this includes version control and check-in, check-out features, for managing and applying controlled vocabularies, and for identifying and managing electronic records. We were unable to effectively search across all our multiple structured and unstructured repositories, and as a result, we were not able to leverage institutional knowledge. Particularly frustrating was our inability to discover useful resources that could be repurposed for the task at hand. Now I'll discuss our approach. To begin, we retained the services of Early & Associates, the information management consulting company introduced by Toby during his discussion. During phase one of our engagement, the Early team conducted fact-finding and deep analysis to articulate the current state of information management at the Foundation, and then they delivered recommendations based on those findings. Phase two involved developing a meaningful enterprise taxonomy, defining a viable information architecture, and making recommendations for enhancing our search system. Phase two continued with vendor selection for a taxonomy management and search enhancement solution through which we selected SmartLogic's Semaphore. And phase three represents the Foundation's actual implementation, which I'll describe shortly. So as part of phase one of our project, we identified various strengths and weaknesses that informed our approach and project roadmap. A key area of weakness was the availability of in-house resources and expertise, but our strengths were significant. We had implemented SharePoint 2003, which housed intranet resources, several active collaboration and team sites, and two very large structured authoritative repositories, including a strategic initiatives and current learning resources library with nearly 3,000 documents, and a grant documents repository, which at the time numbered around 300,000 files. In addition to our SharePoint 2003 repositories, we also had a rich collection of digitized archival materials stored in another system. These included nearly 20,000 historical research files and archival finding aids, all fully cataloged with rich metadata. We had records retention policies and schedules to govern the management and disposition of official records through their life cycle. And finally, we had an appetite for improving knowledge management, and in particular, to eliminate the reinvention of the wheel, to improve resources for evaluating progress and impact, and to preserve strategies, tactics, and lessons learned over the years. So our next steps were to formalize an information management strategy. This involved assessing our current state of tools, search, taxonomy, governance, and culture and process, to gather stakeholder and user requirements, to articulate our vision very clearly, and to ensure alignment of the information strategy and vision to foundation goals and requirements. The next step was to secure executive and stakeholder support. One method we used here was to create a foundation steering committee whose membership included decision makers from across the foundation. Next, we identified core team skills and roles needed to implement the strategy. These included specialists in content management, taxonomy, metadata, and records, SharePoint experts, and content stewards and subject matter experts. And finally, we planned the project, the roadmap for which I'll describe next. So I'll highlight the key elements of our project plan and summarize what we've accomplished so far. The first element, defining the information architecture, was completed during phase 2 of our initial project, which I described above and have summarized here. Some of our key accomplishments to date include a functional taxonomy with processes in place for continuous enrichment and refinement, and SharePoint content types, which we've applied to our high-value content. The next element involved enhancing primary systems to support the information management strategy. The primary systems that I'm talking about include SharePoint and our grant file management system. Some of our key accomplishments here so far include a successful upgrade and migration of content to MOS 2007, a successful upgrade of our grant file management system, including the implementation of complex automated workflows for managing our grant files, which comprise the majority of the electronic records created by the Foundation. This system also facilitates the consistent tagging of grant files using terms from the taxonomy, as well as the storage of all finalized grant files in the appropriate SharePoint repository. And then lastly, an electronic records management system implementation plan to manage additional Foundation records. The next element of the project involved implementing the semaphore taxonomy management and auto classification tools, as well as implementing enhanced search features. It also included the identification of content on which to focus our initial classification efforts. We decided to focus on the 3 structured and high-value collections that I've described earlier, 2 of which were already stored in SharePoint. The third we migrated from an external system into MOS 2007. We focused on these because each collection was already very well defined, was highly curated with 1 or more staff having stewardship responsibility for its content, and each contained content that was considered by the Foundation to be of archival or permanent value. So some of our key accomplishments here have included successful implementation of Semaphore, full classification of the high-value content, which includes the now 500,000 file grant document repository, enhanced enterprise search features, and improved findability of our high-value content. And some additional significant outcomes of the work, aside from developing institutional expertise in using MOS 2007, in developing and enriching taxonomies, and in using Semaphore, was the introduction of the power of semantics to our user search experience. It clearly wouldn't have been practical or feasible to expect manual subject classification of our 500,000 item grant file collection. We were able to classify the entire collection in about 2 weeks' time using Semaphore's auto classification tools. And as a result, users can find grant documents by subject, which they couldn't do before. And this has expanded opportunities for learning and repurposing of valuable content. So now I'll show you how this works in our current search environment. As you can see on this slide, I entered a simple keyword, housing, into the SharePoint search field. You'll notice a message at the top of the results list that lets users know that the results come from all intranet sites. Also notice that the number of results exceeds 13,000. Users can narrow the results of an original search by selecting a specific collection. In this example, I selected program documents, which is one of the 3 high-value collections that we auto-classified. And now, when I rerun the search, the number of results decreases to about 2,300, and the message changes to remind users that they're looking in that collection only. This is just one way in which we use SharePoint alone to help narrow and improve the relevance of search features or search results. So native SharePoint tools become much more powerful with the addition of semaphore web parts, which expose the terms used to classify our content. Note the search suggestions that appear to the right of the search results. These terms are suggested by the search system because they are similar in meaning to the keyword originally entered. So when you click a suggested term, in this case housing, it will replace your keyword query with a subject query that limits the results even further. I'll show you that on the next slide. So when I click the term, it replaces the old keyword with the subject housing. And now also notice that the results have decreased from 2,300 to about 500. At this point, users can begin browsing the results or click on one or more of the related terms that are provided under search suggestions. The relationships of these terms to the selected subject term are defined within the semaphore system. A project this comprehensive comes with several challenges. Defining processes to ensure that high-value content is placed in a formal repository is an ongoing challenge. To date, we've only automated workflows for our grant files. Processes for adding and tagging content in other repositories are still manual, so that work remains part of our upcoming roadmap. Another significant challenge involved custom development and integration of systems with SharePoint. Customization, for example, of our grant file management system was complex and resource intensive, and it required a significant amount of change management and user training. Developing expertise and core competencies presented challenges as well. Our core team continues to learn and build expertise while having to move this project forward. And not surprisingly, we had to deal with competing priorities. Unfortunately, implementing our IM strategy was not the only big enterprise project that was going on at the time, so we needed to plan with this in mind. So this project has been a tremendous learning experience for the core team, and I'll share a few key lessons here. A sound strategic plan is fundamentally important, but it remains just that without the expertise and resources needed to implement it. So building expertise in-house takes time. If you don't have the time, consider hiring staff with that expertise at the onset of your project. Focus on developing high-value resources. If possible, give them the highest priority in your implementation plan. In our case, the 3 collections we developed were not only valuable, but they were also well organized and cared for. So by focusing on these valuable resources, the results were immediately visible to and useful for our users. Don't stray from the strategic plan unless you have to. While our initial approach has deviated from the recommended plan, we continue to return to the plan to guide our work. That said, as time passes, organizations evolve, and significant changes in your organization, of course, will have some impact on your strategy and approach. And lastly, this process requires time, probably more time than you'll expect. Adjust your approach and manage your expectations to ensure continued support and resources. And if you can, work in short cycles, with each cycle ending in the delivery of a new service or a function. So within the past 2 months, we've shifted our focus onto upgrading to SharePoint 2010, which we are planning to launch in early 2012. We started working on defining an improved information architecture which takes advantage of new content organization features within SharePoint 2010. We're also planning related system upgrades and integrations, including an upgrade to Office 2010 and changes to the grants management system to ensure compatibility with SharePoint 2010. We'll develop additional workflows to ensure placement of content into proper repositories and to ensure full classification. Our planned search enhancements include enriched faceted search and symbol federated search. We'll introduce clear governance for the new environment as part of the change management and user training process. And we'll pilot an electronic records management system which has been defined to work within the SharePoint 2010 environment. So this concludes my portion of today's presentation. If you have questions or would like further information, please feel free to contact me directly. And you also may wish to contact Dahlia Levine, our Enterprise Information Architect and Resident Taxonomist. Thanks very much. Now I'll turn the presentation back over to Maya.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Nicki. It's always great to hear a customer's perspective, and you did a great job of describing how Ford Foundation overcame its challenges with SharePoint using ontologies and classification. I'd like to open the webinar to questions now. Please use the Q&A window in the lower corner of the webinar dialog screen. We have only a few minutes left, so I'd like to get to the questions as soon as possible. The first question we have is, what language challenges have you had to overcome, or did you just have to deal with English? And that goes to Nicki.
We've been very lucky. All of the business of the foundation is conducted in English, so we've focused on English language taxonomy only. That's not to say that we don't have opportunities coming to us in the future to deal with documents written in languages other than English, but right now our challenge has been focused on the English language.
I think I'm going to actually extend that question a little bit and ask Toby. Does Semaphore support other languages, and if yes, what are those languages? Toby?
The answer to that is yes, absolutely. The toolset is completely UTF-8 compliant, so we can store all the different symbols and characters for the different languages. We have the ability to automatically classify content in 26 different languages, and there is a full list of those on the website.
Great, thanks. Here's another question for you, Toby. Could you better explain the taxonomy functionality that SB 2010 does not provide? For instance, associative relationships, entity extraction, and I'm sorry, I believe this is a good question for both Toby and Leslie. So Toby, maybe you can kick it off, and then Leslie can pick up after you finish.
Sure. So you can certainly create a hierarchy of topics or entities within SharePoint 2010. It is true that you cannot create associative relationships, i.e. this person knows about this topic or this accessory is related to this product, things like that, which are powerful when users are trying to navigate. It also doesn't support polyhierarchy, so you couldn't have something like the United Kingdom is part of the European Union and Europe, or England is part of the UK and Europe. So those kind of things cannot be done. You also can't really extend out the nodes or topics within a taxonomy with your own information, which could be used to drive the user experience. So all of those things are missing. There's also somewhat limited governance around the taxonomies, and what tends to happen is that organizations will build a taxonomy in one department, another department will get sight of it, start changing it themselves without realizing the impact it has on the original department, and then you end up with metadata which is not consistent with the taxonomy, and that leads to all kinds of issues with findability and any sort of logic you apply downstream to the workflow. And then certainly things like entity extraction and so on, which help you to build out the model more quickly, are not included. Although having said that, there is some functionality if you add faster SharePoint into the mix.
Leslie, would you like to add to that?
No, I think that Toby covered it pretty thoroughly.
Thanks. There is a question around polyhierarchy. So Toby, and I think this is more to do with Semaphore, are people asking for polyhierarchical support?
Yes, we see that a lot, and the problem is if you do have something which, it's a bit like when you try and store a document in a folder structure, and you kind of think, well, actually this document belongs in 2 folders, and that's really why you want polyhierarchy, and there are sort of countless examples in business where it really is important and valuable. So what people end up doing is kind of creating all kinds of sort of pseudo duplicates within the taxonomy, and it becomes increasingly sort of confusing for users when they are tagging or searching because these things exist in different places and described slightly differently. So, I would say this is an important issue.
I would add too that if there's a lot of need for polyhierarchy, it may be a good question about how valid your taxonomy is, because you're going to need to build something that you can scale and that's permissive and flexible as content grows. And so if it's not holding up when you're just building it in terms of where you want to place your information, it may be that you want to look at a more faceted approach.
Thank you. A question for Nicki, and I know we're running out of time here. How long did it take you to do product selection, and how long did the implementation take?
The product selection took just a couple of months. I think the phase 1 work and phase 2 work of the project really helped us prepare for defining what our requirements were going to be for enhanced search. And by that time, we had also really structured our taxonomy, at least at the top-level facets, and we had begun populating each of those facets with vocabulary and had been testing those with users as well. So when it came to the selection process through which we worked with Early and Associates as well, we defined our requirements. We then did kind of a broad search of the different vendors that could provide services that were that would address those requirements, and then we narrowed it down to a very short list of vendors and spent most of our time examining the features and services of those vendors. And it was through that process that we picked, again, the Smart Logic Semaphore Suite, and I think from start to finish that process may have taken us about 2.5 months, not very long at all. As far as implementing goes, that took another several months, and this really kind of preceded the vendor selection, implementing our taxonomy and information architecture. We used some of our existing systems to inform the structure that we would use for our taxonomy, and that structure is one that is in place with relatively few changes today. The main work, which is really ongoing, is in building out the vocabularies for each of these facets of the taxonomy and then continuing to enrich all of those facets with associative and other relationships.
Great, thanks, Nicki. At this point, we're really out of time for this webinar. I see I've already used up 2 minutes in the new hour, so I'm going to stop. I'd like to thank our guests, Leslie Owens from Forrester Research and Nicki Lodico from the Ford Foundation, and Toby Conrad for a very informative webinar. If you have any other questions, and I know I didn't get to quite a few of yours, we will make sure that we answer those questions. But if you have any other questions and would like to discuss this topic in greater detail, please email us at marketing@smartlogic.com, and we'll make sure we get back to you. We'll also make a recording of this webinar available on demand. And in addition, we encourage you to download our white paper entitled Accelerating the Adoption and ROI of SharePoint Using Semaphore from our website, www.smartlogic.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.